Good evening. This is Raúl Mascanosa, and welcome to my program, Más con Más. Gracias por estar con nosotros. I appreciate your being here this evening and with us every Friday evening to hear about the news and what's going on in our world. What we try and do differently in this program, and then the reason for the name Más con Más, is because we try and go más allá. We try and go beyond the headlines of the week and actually go in depth to understand what's happening in our world, what's happening in our economy, and bring some insights to you that perhaps you're not seeing someplace else. We're hoping to have that difference in our programming, and we hope you enjoy it. We've got some terrific guests for you today, one of whom is Peter Asqui. Peter Asqui is a young man that I've known for over a decade, a very brilliant individual, successful entrepreneur, investment manager, and we're going to be talking to him about what's going on in the economy, what's going on with all the financial news that we're seeing, the chaos that we're seeing in the markets, and what the implications are for that and for our lives down the road. Later on in the program, we've got a second guest that we're interviewing. His name is René Lamar. René Lamar is an attorney and a gun rights advocate. Like myself, I've been a strong defender of the Second Amendment for many, many years, in fact, for my whole lifetime, as is René. And we'll be talking about something very curious that's been going on that really hasn't been talked about a lot in the news, but it's the amazing number of men and women that are going out and buying firearms, some of them for the very first time, and stocking up with tons of ammunition given the crisis that we're going through right now. And some governors throughout the country have actually tried to put a halt to that. They don't believe that the Second Amendment should apply in times like this. And René will make a compelling argument that it's precisely in times like this when we need to defend the Second Amendment because people are concerned about their personal security, about the security of their families. So we look forward to talking to René about that particular situation. But I want to begin by talking about really what's happening in our world today. And you know, you've seen it in the news. Subject number one continues to be obviously the coronavirus and the effects of this massive shutdown that we've had throughout the United States. We are now up to about over 26 million unemployed individuals in the United States. The unemployment rate is reaching 20%. As I mentioned in our last episode, the highest number of unemployment that we've seen in the United States was back in 1933, when unemployment reached 24.9%. Now, mind you, that was a different time back then. That recession was caused because of underlying economic situations that basically led not just to a depression in the United States, but really a global depression. What we are seeing right now is a recession, soon to be a depression, that is being driven not by underlying economic fundamentals, but quite frankly, by a health crisis. A health crisis that few people were expecting. We had certainly heard back in December, January, that China was experiencing this epidemic, that there was, this lockdown in Wuhan, that there were, hundreds of thousands of people being infected. But it really wasn't until towards the end of January, early February, when we began seriously taking note of the fact that this may, in fact, spread outside of China and come here to our own shores. Part of the problem with this whole situation is that China, quite frankly, was not very forthright with what was going on within its borders and telling the rest of the world exactly how contagious this disease was, and allowing outside experts to come in and see for themselves what was going on and being able to evaluate the risks, not just to China, but to other countries as well. So, this whole pandemic thing really, I think, caught a lot of people off guard. I mean, people can say what they want, but I know, speaking for myself, I knew what was going on in China. I saw that it was an epidemic. We were getting reassurances that it may not necessarily cross over to our country, but in fact, it did. And when it did, it spread very quickly, being as contagious as it is, and now we're faced with this current situation that we're seeing in America with our economy being locked down. But the point that I'm trying to make here is this didn't come from the economic side of the equation. This came as a result of a health pandemic. And, you know, our factories are still intact. We've got our economic base still on good footing in terms of our assets to manufacture, our assets to produce services, valuable services for the rest of the world. So there's been no deterioration in that capability. It's been a conscientious decision on the part of our government leaders to shut down the economy for what? The primary reason that we were given for this, and I think it's a sound one, was basically we did not want to overwhelm our health system. And that's exactly when we look back at what happened in Italy, that's what happened in Italy. It struck them so hard and so fast that the health system in Italy was unable to cope with the hundreds of people that were showing up daily in emergency rooms, which eventually became thousands of people. And they reached a point where they just became overwhelmed, and you had the horrific situation of people with COVID-19, the coronavirus, the Wuhan virus, whatever you want to call it, basically dying in the hallways unattended in these hospitals. We didn't want to see a repeat of that here in the US. And I think that's why you've seen our government move so fast and so quickly to basically shut down the economy, to distance ourselves so that we would basically cut the legs off the virus, you know, metaphorically speaking, and hopefully not have the virus overwhelm our health system. What we're seeing now, I think, quite frankly, is that it's worked. You know, we had these initial, you know, numbers telling us that we were going to see hundreds of thousands of people possibly dead or dying, and the latest numbers now appear to be in the order of magnitude of perhaps 60,000 deaths. So these measures, I think, have had an effect, but it's also taking a tremendous toll on our economy. These numbers that we're seeing, 26 million people out of work, 20% of the population, that's 1 in every 5 individuals right now out of work. And it could very well go to that 25% number, 1 in 4 individuals out of work. That is something that, quite frankly, I've not seen in my lifetime. I never imagined that I'd see oil prices collapse the way they've collapsed. That's an industry that, you know, is incredibly important. You know, for us here in the United States, it produces a lot of high-paying jobs. And when you've got oil prices here in the U.S. between below $40, it makes it impossible for oil producers and natural gas producers in America to pump that oil, to pump that natural gas out of the ground at anywhere near a profit. So, you know, that's something that is also, you know, remarkable that we've seen in the last couple of weeks and unprecedented in my lifetime for sure. So we've been seeing some dramatic changes in the economic landscape. The stock market, you know, took a big tumble, as we all know. It was close to 30,000 back in early February, dropped down to just below 19,000 in the worst moments of this crisis. It's now sort of back around 23,000. We've had a fairly quiet week. The activity in the stock market today has been somewhat subdued. This morning we had the durable goods numbers came out. Basically, U.S. durable goods down 14% during the month of March, as we've seen, in essence, automotive plants shut down, Boeing stopped manufacturing airplanes and shipping airplanes. So our durable goods orders in the United States have taken a big hit as well. And I think we're going to continue to see these numbers for some time to come. I've told you before, and I'll say it again, I don't think that the numbers that we're seeing right now are entirely accurate. In fact, I think they're understated. And the reason I say that is because the system that basically we have in different states throughout the U.S., starting here in the state of Florida, to capture those unemployment claims is broken. There are literally hundreds of thousands of people that have been unable to even get into the website to register their unemployment claims. So I think you'll see those numbers continue to climb in terms of the unemployment claims, in terms of the unemployment percentage numbers. And I think we're in for several months of additional pain. I am optimistic and hopeful that once we get this economy started again, and it's already beginning in some of the southern states, starting with Governor Kemp in Georgia, who's decided to open up Georgia, I think we'll see things start to level off and get better. but there's going to be some industries that are not going to recover anytime soon. So let's talk a little bit more about this with our first guest, with Peter Asqui, and let's talk to Peter.
Somos NTV USA. Conéctate con nuestra programación en directo en los siguientes horarios y días. Lunes a viernes, 6 de la tarde, hora del este, línea deportiva. 7 de la noche, hora del este, O Qué Chisme con Odi Abreu. A las 8 de la noche, punto final. A las 9 de la noche, lunes y miércoles, A lo Cortés con Tony Cortés. Los martes a las 9, dame un like, y el jueves a las 9 también, De Noche con Roche. NTV USA, de Miami para el mundo, con una vista. Basta.
Rosa Águila tiene 87 años, vive en New Jersey y hizo mascarillas con sus propias manos para regalarlas a los amigos, a la familia, en los hospitales, a los más necesitados. Más de 1,000 mascarillas.
Desde NTV USA, Cachito Universal Studio, queremos darle un beso y un abrazo muy grande a Rosa Águila.
Señores, ustedes ven que lo que yo digo no es mentira, lo que me pasa a mí no le pasa a nadie. Vengo a Cachita Universal Studio a estar con Angelina Castro en su programa y me encuentro a toda la pila de actores estos cubanos aquí que la vida los ha masacrado. Mi amor, oye, que esto es Miami.
Soy Norlene. Welcome to a place where we produce the best coffee, Café La Rica. En Ciela Roasters hacemos el mejor café, el café oficial de los Miami Marlins, my team. Somos una gran familia y lo único que queremos es que todos prueben nuestro café, Café La Rica.
Familia, no hay nada como recomendar a los amigos un lugar para compartir en familia. Di Crespo Steakhouse, en el corazón de Kendall. Comiendo como en casa, la comida que tú te mereces. Y por supuesto, las mejores carnes. Carnes premium. La dirección es fácil. 13772 Southwest 152 Street. En el corazón de Kendall, al lado de Country World.
As mentioned, we have a special guest with us today. His name is Peter Asqui, a successful entrepreneur and investment professional. I've known Peter for almost a decade now. Terrific individual, very knowledgeable about financial markets. And we invited him on the program today to talk about what's going on in the financial markets. And hope to have him often on Más con Más. But Peter, welcome to the program. This is our third segment. Hope to have you in the future here on Más con Más. And thank you for being with us today.
Thank you, Raul, for the invitation. Very kind.
Thank you. Thank you. So listen, you've seen what's been going on, Peter.
Right.
You know, the latest sort of unemployment numbers, 26 million Americans unemployed. The unemployment rate probably at around 20% right now. and possibly going higher. I mean, one of the things that has sort of shocked me as I'm seeing this whole thing unravel is the fact that we don't really know what the unemployment claims numbers are. At least we don't have accurate numbers, because the unemployment systems of so many of these state offices are basically completely antiquated, starting with ours here in Florida. Apparently it was written like in COBOL languages, you know, back in like the Stone Age or something. And they've struggled with even being able to say how many people have filed. So the numbers that are being reported to the Department of Labor, in my view, are actually understated. And that's why I think we may actually be heading north of 20% in terms of the unemployment rate. But I'd like to hear your view. Obviously, you know, this is a different time than the Great Depression, but you know, we're in uncharted territory. How do you view this, Peter?
Well, I agree with you, Raul, that the unemployment numbers and the underemployment numbers are probably grossly underreported. But that historically has always been the case, even during the best of times, as they were, you know, in late February. The underemployment rate was kind of masked and hidden. Only, you know, if you deliberately researched the underemployment rate, you would have noticed that it was around 7%. So even when the economy is very strong and growing very rapidly, the reality of the labor market in all societies, all human societies, is that you will always have underemployment and people that just get discouraged and they drop out. But for the current situation, you know, one of the things I learned when I was in business school at Carnegie Mellon is that, and they're very data-driven. They're all about numbers. You know, there isn't a single class at Carnegie Mellon that isn't about math. But one of the things that you learn during the program is that sometimes data becomes uninterpretable. And when crises like this happen, the numbers don't really reflect a reality. And I think that's what you're alluding to, that the numbers that are being reported by the governments now probably grossly report the brutality and the suffering of the labor force.
Yeah. Well, listen, you mentioned a great point here, because on the flip side of that, you know, numbers argument is the fact that a couple of weeks ago we were talking about deaths in this country, you know, reaching, you know, hundreds of thousands of people, if not, you know, approaching 1 million at one point. When these original estimates were being put out by supposedly some very, you know, smart people that were making these projections. And, you know, Dr. Fauci and Dr. Birx were talking about it, and Donald Trump actually looked worried, you know, I mean, and he was like, you know, very somber and saying, hey, we got to shut this down because otherwise we're going to have, you know, dead bodies on the street. Now, those numbers have basically been adjusted downwards from, you know, millions or hundreds of thousands to, I think, 60,000. And I mean, for me, it's been kind of shocking because, like you, I'm a big believer in math and data, right? But when the data is so, when the swings are that dramatic, you have to ask yourself, what happened?
Well, I think that goes back to what I learned in business school. So when crises happen, data is very likely to become uninterpretable. So when I was in business school, it was in 2010 to 2012. I mean, we were studying financial statements and of publicly traded companies that just went through, you know, the 2008, 2009 global financial crisis. And I remember, you know, in one particular class of financial analysis, we were assigned John Deere Company, you know, great company. They produce some of the finest tractors and machinery in the history of the world.
I know it well.
But you know, the data was real. The numbers didn't lie or anything. It's just that when these events happen, the numbers don't make sense. The data really doesn't convey any meaningful information. So when you have to analyze situations under crisis events, sometimes it's just best to, you know, don't put too much faith in the numbers, because the numbers are skewed by the effects of these very powerful crises.
Well, you know, the latest number to come out was the durable goods number for March, you know, down 14%. I mean, a lot of it obviously being driven by the automotive sector, Boeing, of course, taking a huge hit. I think that's probably the second biggest hit that we've seen since they started tracking the durable goods number. But obviously not good for American manufacturing, right? I mean, some of the few industries that we have that really, generate a lot of employment, large numbers of employees in America. Those
Right.
guys have obviously taken it on the head. They take it on the chin, I should say.
They have. You know, uh, this crisis is very serious. But you've known me we've known each other for 10 years, and one of the subjects I'm also very interested in is history. And when you look back at history, the most devastating events in human history have been conflicts, wars, and that didn't happen this time. So the one, silver lining to me in all this disaster is that nothing blew up. Nobody died on a battlefield. No factories were destroyed. No offices were destroyed. The economy did not lose any knowledge that would be lost when people are killed. So the only thing that's really been lost is money. And money in today's world can really be created by governments whenever they want. And I'm sure you remember from your classes in macroeconomics the famous Phillips curve,
Sure.
which relates unemployment with inflation. So a lot of people are freaking out about, is inflation going to take off now that the government is doing very unconventional moves and they're printing money and, basically throwing it on the street. But the Phillips curve suggests that the higher the unemployment, the lower the inflation. So the economy does have a margin of abuse where the government can do abusive things monetarily and financially, and the theory and the evidence of the past suggests that you can get away for it for a while. You can't get away with it forever, but you can get away with paying the piper for a while, and I think that's the situation we're in now.
Well, yeah, and you look at oil prices. I mean, oil prices have basically, tanked. I mean, there's no demand for, air
Right.
travel or cruise ships these days, and
Right.
so, oil. You certainly are not going to get any inflationary effects from oil anytime soon.
Right, you're not.
But I do think what we're going to see, Peter, is sort of a drastic restructuring of certain industries. I mean, you're right. The factories are still intact. The restaurants are still there. The hotels are still there. The cruise
Right.
ships are still there. But quite frankly, I don't see companies like the cruise line industry, coming back anytime soon. Certainly not the way they've been operating in the past, right? And I think it's going to take a long time for people to get on airplanes again, for people to take vacations. I think there's going to be a period of time here, I don't know, call it 6 months, a year, where people are going to be very cautious of sort of leaving their immediate surroundings, given what they've experienced these last few weeks.
Well, I agree with you. There's going to be hesitation in the short run. But again, look back in history. The last time a pandemic like this happened was 1918, the famous Spanish flu, right? Which didn't originate in Spain. Nobody really knows where it originated. They call it the Spanish flu because Spain was the only neutral country during World War I that wasn't censoring their press. So while the Allies were killing each other, and all these European countries were killing each other on the battlefields of Europe, and they were censoring their media, the illusion was created that the Spanish flu happened in Spain, and therefore they give it, it only existed in Spain because only the Spanish media was reporting it. But when after that pandemic happened, that was 1918, 1919, and then what happened? They call it the Roaring 20s, where the economy in the U.S. really was growing very quickly in the 1920s. People were living lifestyles that had never been lived before. Consumption was going through the roof, and it ended poorly in 1929. But at least for a decade, the party was on. And the party was totally unexpected in 1918 when the pandemic happened. So I agree with you that there are going to be industries that are going to be affected even in the long term, like the cruise industry. But the beautiful thing about markets is that there's always a price at which somebody's willing to get on a cruise ship.
Sure.
And if the tickets used to be worth $1,000 and they drop them to $300, $250, I'm pretty confident they're going to be able to attract people on those boats.
Sure.
But yes, of course, procedures will change. They won't allow you on the ship unless you're perfectly healthy or you believe to be perfectly healthy. They might change the air filtration systems on the boats to make sure that rooms where sick people are quarantined, the air circulating in those quarantine rooms are totally segregated from the rest of the ship. I mean, there are many things that airlines and shipping companies can do, cruise companies can do, to almost eliminate the risk of pandemics or epidemics occurring on their vessels. I don't know if they have the creativity to adapt, but if they don't adapt, if they don't upgrade, they will collapse.
Listen, and I think you bring up the beauty of the market, right? I mean, the prices will adjust. I think we're going to see that also, with China. I mean, people are talking now about, well, gee, we got to get all of our manufacturing out of China. Well, guess what? I mean, the Chinese are still a very cost competitive, producer on the global, scale, if you will.
Right.
And I tend to think that people have short memories, and I think that a year or two from now, if China is still the low-cost producer for a lot of industrial components, you're going to see a lot of U.S. manufacturers hesitant to completely sever their relationships with China. Not to mention the fact, that the U.S. companies have a vested interest in selling in China. I mean, for
Right.
some industries like General Motors, I think they sell more automobiles in China today than they do in the U.S. So
Right.
That's going to be a tricky situation to see how that whole thing unfolds, and the U.S. wanting to sort of bring back some of those key industries to the U.S. But China's still going to be a player no matter what.
Oh, for sure. And I think that another change that will happen due to this crisis is that companies and investors all over the world will realize that geopolitical risk is real. It's not an illusion. It's not a fantasy. And when you move a supply chain overseas, you have to also consider the cost of losing that supply chain when geopolitical conditions change. And I think the last 30 years, 40 years of globalization, especially since the fall of the Soviet Union and the success of what was the European Union, after the fall of the Soviet Union, people forgot. They've forgotten their history. And there was a holiday from history, right? Some people even believed the history was over, like Francis Fukuyama, who wrote that famous book that really turned out to have nothing true in it, the end of history. So history is alive and well. The world continues to be a dangerous place. It continues to be very unstable. And investors or CEOs want to move supply chains to the other side, to the ends of the other side of the planet, to the ends of the earth. They will have to pay a very stiff price when the politicians decide to take a different route.
Sure.
So it's all up to them. I mean, I wouldn't do what they're doing.
That peace dividend from the end of the Cold War was relatively short-lived, right? I mean, and you're right. I think the world is still a very dangerous place. We may not be facing sort of the mutual assured destruction, when we had sort of two superpowers in terms of the Soviet Union and the U.S.
Right.
But now, you've got terrorism, you've got pandemics, you've got, actors out there that are just as powerful as nation states in some cases. So it's still going to be a dangerous world. But listen, I appreciate you coming on the program, Peter. Thank you very much for your insights. I hope to have you again in the future. And look forward. I understand you're coming out with a podcast. Is that correct?
I am. The podcast will be about geopolitical risk.
Excellent.
The risk of ideologies, and history hasn't ended, and what people choose to believe about how society should be organized will affect economics and financial markets for many years to come.
Terrific. Peter, somebody wants to contact you. What's the best way of getting a hold of you?
I believe my Twitter handle is at P Azcue, AZCUE. I have this wonderfully Basque last name. So I'm on Twitter. If you Google me, everything about me is public information, which maybe that's not a good idea, but it is. So easy to find me.
Well, thank you, Peter. Thank you for being on Más con Más, and we look forward to seeing you again in the future.
Nuestra plataforma en TV USA tiene su propia aplicación para teléfono inteligente. Si el sistema operativo de su teléfono es Android, vaya al Play Store y busque NTV USA. Descárguela e instálela. Si tiene un iPhone, debe ir sencillamente al Apps Store, buscar NTV USA e instalarla. Es sencillo, fácil y cómodo. Ahí va a tener las notificaciones para poder ver todos los shows. Igualmente, en los anuncios de los programas de NTV USA encontrará los enlaces que con un solo clic lo llevarán directamente a las aplicaciones de teléfonos inteligentes. Así que disfrute de nuestra programación y esté conectado. No se olvide de darle clip a la campanita para activar las notificaciones. Camina para que te conozcan, que con una vista basta.
Hello, my name's Dave Brisky, and my new program, Brisky Business, is going to be coming to you every Wednesday. We're going to start off that program with a nice cup of coffee together, and then we're going to start talking about business. We're going to talk about Brisk business basics, Brisk buy and bail, Brisk's bulls and bears, and Brisk's best and brightest, which really is a show about mentorship and about learning about business. I'll see you on Wednesday.
Entonces nada.
Con cachita y bendición, así que usted compre cachita.
Nada, a toda mi gente, le voy a decir una cosita. Si quieres pasarla bien, cómprate un café cachita. Yo por mi parte lo tengo en mi casita para mi mamá y para mi abuelita. Cachita.
Ay, Dios mío. Improvisación y todo eso lo cogemos para comerciales, pero déjame decirte porque me va a quitar el trabajo.
Espérate un momentico, bebé, déjala pan. Quería invitarlos a que vinieran aquí a Mr. Arepa, que queda ubicado en la 16733 Northwest 67 Avenida, donde se comen las mejores arepas, así que usted olvídese de la popusa y de todo lo demás. Venga aquí a Mr. Arepa, que tienen las mejores arepas venezolanas, y a mí como colombiana sí que me encanta la arepa, bebé. Ya saben, vengan a comer arepa conmigo, con esta arepa que está deliciosa, mis amores. Esto queda ubicado en Miami Lakes.
Joining us today to talk about what's going on with the incredible sales of guns and ammunition throughout the country, as well as the efforts on the part of some state governors and municipal employees to restrict individual rights, is René Lamar. René Lamar is an attorney. a very passionate defender of individual liberties, and a person who believes that government should have its place in our society, and that place should be somewhat restricted and should not be overbearing. Rene, thank you for being on Más con Más today. And what do you think about all this that's going on? What do you think of this incredible sort of sales that we're seeing of guns and ammunition all throughout the country?
Well, Raul, first of all, thank you very much for having me on. It's exciting to be on your program. But you know, this is something that you know, you and I went through as children went through the Cuban Revolution, and that was to say the least disruptive in our lives. But this has certainly been the most disruptive event that I believe you and I have ever confronted.
Sure.
Now, I can't talk to what it's like, what the Europeans went through during World War II, when, you know, their homes and cities were being bombed and invaded and liberated. But certainly this is a new one. This is a new one for me, and for everybody. I think this, you know, we have an invisible enemy, and it's novel, and but you know, my opinion is that our Constitution here in the United States is not a fair weather Constitution. It's a Constitution precisely for the hard times, and we're going through some very hard times now. Unfortunately, to quote Rahm Emanuel, you know, no good crisis should go unwasted. You know, should go wasted. You know, and a lot of people in positions of power take advantage of crises to do things that they know they couldn't get away with otherwise.
Sure, sure. Well, we see that in particular with, you know, governors basically deciding that, you know, people can't buy firearms and ammunition, or wanting to basically restrict that at a time when, quite frankly, most rational people are realizing that they want some protection. I mean, one of the things that struck me, Rene, and the reason I wanted to have you, you know, on the program today is, you know, when I saw the news that even in Arizona, which, as far as I know, I mean, historically has been a very gun-friendly state. I mean, you know, I think people were, you know, open carrying firearms in Arizona long before that term open carry even became part of our vocabulary. I mean, it was just sort of second nature for people in Arizona to carry firearms.
Yeah,
and
they always get the top rating when, for example, I think one of the magazines, I think it's Guns and Ammo, does a rating of the states as far as, you know, different criteria as far as gun rights go, and Arizona's number one year after year.
But, you know, the gun shop owners there are saying, you know, we got people walking in here that are purchasing firearms that we've never seen before because they've never had firearms. And it sort of struck me as odd that in Arizona, there are even people that don't have firearms. But then again, I realize that, you know, Arizona's seen a lot of influx from people coming over from California and other, you know, states, precisely because of the regulations and the bureaucratic nature and the high taxes of places like California. They're moving into Arizona. And apparently now those folks from California and outside of Arizona that have now, you know, moved into that state are apparently finding out that, you know, it pays to have a shotgun or a handgun at home when situations turn very dicey.
Absolutely. You know, I bet it's a liberating influence, but it's not just in Arizona. A lot of sources are reporting that many of these that many of the gun buyers are new gun buyers.
Right. Mm-hmm.
In other words, they're people that are realizing to vote with their pocketbooks and are saying, look, it's obvious in the middle of a crisis that we can't rely on 911 or the government or the police or the National Guard. We've got to take the care of our families and our security into our own hands, because nobody else is going to be there for us. So I think it's a reflection of that. Yeah. You know, when people see people going crazy over things like toilet paper,
sure,
which is really a asinine thing. You know,
who would have thought, right? I mean, you know, in my list of things to, have stocked up.
Stockpile. Yeah.
Stockpiled. Toilet paper was not really number one or number two, right?
Right.
And suddenly you see, people rushing to Walmart to buy toilet paper, and I'm like, well, what's going on here? I mean, this is like ridiculous, right? I mean, but I guess different strokes for different folks, I guess, right? I mean, different priorities.
But people see that and they say, I better do something to enhance my security and to enhance my safety and the safety of my family and the broader safety of my neighborhood and my it's on the one end it's encouraging because you see people acting as free citizens and individuals. On the other hand, it's a little worrisome because there's absolutely no confidence in our elected officials.
Well, look, we've lived through this, Rene, here in South Florida with Hurricane Andrew and other events like that. I mean, you remember when South Dade was wiped out. I mean, that very quickly turned into a very dangerous situation. And the only way that you would feel safe going down there to help, people that were stranded down there, quite frankly, and I experienced it, was being armed because, there were, people that were out looting and taking advantage of the situation. So of course, in a crisis like this, you would expect that people would go out and want to have, protection for their families and, like you say, their neighbors and whatnot, their communities.
Absolutely.
So, those of us that have guns, it's not unusual, but I guess the press and the media are sort of shocked that, when situations become dicey, that's what people want. They want guns and they want ammunition and they want a lot of it. And like you said, the Constitution was not a fair weather Constitution. The Second Amendment is not there for us to go out and hunt or for us to go out and target shoot. It's basically to protect life and liberty when it's in peril. And guess what? Life and liberty may be very well imperiled in these times. So there's a natural corollary there.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember you raised Hurricane Andrew. I remember, the famous signs that, I think were, pictures of these signs were flashed worldwide that said, "You loot, we shoot."
Sure.
And there was a study by the Departments of Sociology, a combined study between the University of Miami and University of Florida. I don't remember the authors, but they came to the conclusion that had it not been for the armed American citizen, all kinds of chaos and mayhem would have broken out in South Florida after Andrew.
Sure. Listen, it's not unlike, what would have happened if we hadn't imposed social distancing. The numbers might have been much higher, right? We don't know what could be the situation if people were not armed. There may be more looting going on. There may be more crime going on. Perhaps not now, but down the road if things get worse, right? So
yeah, or heaven forbid that something would happen to, for example, to our food distribution chain.
Sure. So
if the food distribution were, thank goodness, the supermarkets have remained relatively full of food, and people have been able to get to that food without any problem. But if there had been a hiccup in any of that,
well, it's funny you mentioned that because there's some videos out today actually from southern Italy where people are basically going hungry and they're starting to show up at the supermarkets and demanding food because they're hungry. And there's a video that's become very popular in Italy of an Italian with his young daughter next to him eating a piece of bread. And he's basically confronting the Prime Minister of Italy and saying, hey, in another day or so, she's not going to have that piece of bread that she's chewing on. So, things could get worse. We're hoping it doesn't happen, Rene. I mean, I'm sure you agree with that. But I tend to think that, an armed society is a polite society. And the fact that people are going out and arming themselves and being prepared for the worst, I actually think it's a good thing, not a bad thing.
I think it's a positive thing, especially, and not to repeat, but especially when many of these are previous, were not gun owners previously. They're new gun owners.
Sure.
In other words, they're becoming people that are conscripted to our way of thinking naturally. They're free-thinking people who may not have been gun lovers or advocates of the Second Amendment, but are now putting it in practice.
You don't have to be a gun lover to understand that it's important to protect your person and protect your family in times like this. Rene, thank you for being on the program. We're sort of running out of a little bit of time here, but I appreciate you being on the program on Más con Más, and I hope to have you back on future segments to talk about this and other subjects.
Let's do it whenever you like.
All right. Thank you, Rene. Thank you very much, and thanks again for being on Más con Más. We'll be back in a minute.
Es cierto que la comida de Brian Restaurante está muy deliciosa.
¡Ah, deliciosa, mijo!
¡Ay, qué carnita!
¿Qué carnita, papá? ¡Qué carnota!
¡Qué pechuguita!
¡Pechuguita! ¡Eso es un par de pechugotas! ¡Mira!
¡Ay, Dios mío! ¡Qué cosa tan hermosa, hermano!
Lo que pasa es que en Brian Restaurante la calidad de su comida es directamente proporcional a la belleza de sus clientes.
450 East, 4 Avenida.
En Hialeah.
Ya tú te tiraste una pinta en Ley en Main. Ahora no puedes dejar fuera a tu esposa, a tu novia, a tu amante, a tu hija, a tu tía, a tu abuela. Vístela y prepárala para que luzca bien. Lista para la fiesta.
Hola, soy Irving González y recuerden nuestro compromiso acá en el programa Inmigración en Frontera por NTV USA. Todos los días estaremos respondiendo a sus preguntas sobre el tema de inmigración, al igual que lo que está pasando al momento. Comuníquese con nuestras redes sociales o pueden llamar al 305-374-4343.
Bueno, mi gente, nosotras las colombianas sí que sabemos qué es lo que es un buen café. El café Cachita, lo mejor para que comparta con toda su familia.
¡Ay, sí! ¡Ay! Café Cachita, el mejor café para compartir.
Y aquí estamos compartiendo Dame un Like, solo por @NTVUSA.
Con una vista basta.
Thank you for being with us here on Más con Más. I'm your host, Raúl Mas, broadcasting here from Cachita Universal Studios.